I think we're all doing research, and I think some of the conversations before this session officially started was, extreme context touches on a lot of valuable issues, and if we get it right, if we get our research right, we can do things that help other people in extreme contexts flourish. So, just having a pardon, apologies, I'm just sharing the wrong file. Let's see if this works. Very good. So, if we get it right, we can do something that's quite beneficial to our research participants and wider society. So I had written some years ago a dissertation on the 2003 SARS outbreak in Canada, and I started emailing some of my key informants, and I was looking for their feedback on, here's a case I wrote about you. Did I get the information right? Does this provide any insight to you? And so I got a number of different responses. So one participant was very encouraged. She said, it is encouraging that I was not the only one who felt that way. So a lot of these people had been through a traumatic experience and had not talked about it to their colleagues, perhaps because there was a lot at stake. And so she felt quite encouraged that, others had similar experiences as her. Other people provided more technical information. So one said, I've reviewed what you sent and I've made a couple of comments to better capture the nuances of the situations that you were describing. So again, a sign that member checks can also help us in our research getting it right. Here's a third email I got. I sent it to quite a senior doctor who dealt with SARS, and he says, in some places, the narrative makes me sound like some sort of combination asshole and genius. Then he added, which is not too far from the truth. So what do we make of that? It's kind of implied from the sort of the advertisement of this workshop. Good writing benefits all scholars. I don't think that's under question, but perhaps it's especially important for those of us interested in extreme contexts. First, we write about the contexts that fall outside our readers' life experiences. So if you're writing about an office of a professional services firm company, many of your readers and your reviewers will probably have personal experience. Our challenge is to write about contexts where people don't have a lot of personal experience to draw on to make sense of these events. Second, contextual detail is essential for grasping the processes we theorize about. And in their 2018 review, I think Marcus, Linda, and Mark talked about so much of understanding what we do is to be able to describe specifically what's going on in an extreme context. Where's the risk? Where's the disruption? Where's the emergency? And finally, we often face dilemmas between normalizing our context versus extremizing them. So by this, I mean, we want to show that, even though we're studying something that might appear quite far from mainstream management, that we can draw lessons from that to mainstream management. Or alternatively, we show that we have an extreme context that, we specifically need to study this context because it highlights something about, let's say, emotion or coordination in a way that we wouldn't see in day-to-day organizational life. So we often face these dilemmas. So my experience, I think April's really the person to talk more about, getting these pieces published and dealing with tough reviewers. Mine will go to an earlier part, which is that maybe good writing can flow. You can make it easier on yourself based on your earlier decisions about research context and methods. So I'm not here to say how it's done, but just to share two ideas I've come across that have helped me navigate some of these dilemmas. So first is about choosing what extreme context to study. And this, I think, applies especially to earlier career researchers, how we select a setting and how do we position our research. And I'll introduce the idea there of an eccentricity ratio. The second will be about some of the dilemmas we face in fieldwork and in extreme context, which are often less structured environments than many of us are used to. And I'll talk about the idea of defining moments. So choose an extreme context. To give you a bit of my own background, I had done a PhD at Queen's. I did a postdoc in Finland at Aalto University. And as I mentioned a bit before this presentation, I now work at University of Warwick in England. And my dissertation was on the Toronto hospital responses to the 2003 SARS outbreak. And since then, I've done ethnographic research projects. So 3 in particular, I'm working with Nina Granquist on storm chasing teams in North America. With Gloria Kutcher at Southampton. We're working on cargo shipping in remote waters. And finally, Daniel Baynes at Bayes Business School about a financial firm's rebuilding after 9/11. Those 3 projects are all involving some sort of field work, either my own data or others' data. My dissertation was a grounded theory type of study, which I think from a scientific perspective is very good. And I don't think that ethnography or grounded theory or any other method is consistently superior. But from a personal perspective, although I was happy with how much of the research turned out, I felt I was missing something. And that missing something for an extreme context researcher was the sense of being there. I thought that if I had actual field experience, I might have an easier time putting things into words and coming up with novel perspectives if I could not only rely on participants' descriptions, but also match them with my own experiences. Second, I would maybe have felt a bit more licensed to be bolder and irreverent if I undertook the same experiences as the people I'm writing about. So many of us write about contexts that are somehow traumatizing or stressful. And of course, we want to be respectful to our participants and give those contexts the weight they deserve, which I believe is interesting. But I also think, at least in my experience, there's moments of levity in extreme contexts that even in the most stressful situations, people will be joking around, there'll be dark humor, there'll be moments of fun and bonding. And I thought that, this is more psychological. I don't know if there's any sort of moral philosophy underpinning it, but if I had been through similar experiences of people, I might feel more comfortable to state things as they are and, show deference, but also be blunt. And finally, in a totally non-scientific reason, I thought, to test myself against others in a situation of hardship, that, do these theories work? Does what we write about extreme contexts work? One way to test that is to be there and to see how well I cope with them. So I launched into some fieldwork related projects that some of this stuff will come up in the rest of the presentation. So I did a 3-year ethnography of storm chasing teams in the US Great Plains, from where these photos come, and aboard a container ship going across a transatlantic voyage. So one question before embarking on these projects is, are they too weird? We are management researchers after all, and the ideal management theorist perhaps comes up with ideas that can be implemented in a professional services firm or a manufacturing organization, is, especially for someone who has just completed their PhD, is embarking on a project about storm chasers too weird for a management theorist? Do you have anything to say about managers after studying these people? So maybe just think for a moment about how weird you can be in this profession and get away with it. One idea that sort of helped me think about this was an idea by Kathleen McDonald, who was working for the Exxon Corporation, and she was in charge of organizational development and diversity. And so her idea was, you can be as eccentric as you are competent. So the more people perceive you to be competent, basically the weirder you can be and have that weirdness accepted. And so she came up with this idea called an eccentricity ratio, which is the ratio between your perceived competence in the workplace and your perceived eccentricity. So your goal should be to balance those two. And so a perceived eccentricity is any part of you or your work, let's say your papers, that don't fit the expectation of an ideal management scholar. So I was embarking to do research on storm chasers, And so that was perhaps a bit eccentric compared to what an ideal management scholar might look like. Second, many of us, not all of us, but many of us maybe do field research where, we have a vague research goal that becomes refined over time. And I think that's become increasingly accepted in management research, that good research questions emerge from data and they're not always there ahead of time. But, obviously it makes things more difficult to explain to your colleagues or funding agencies or even your participants what you're there looking for. So that's the perceived eccentricity. Your perceived competence is how good others think you are. And I don't think this is an objective thing, but to a stereotypical management academic, you might be perceived as more competent if you have a record of getting publications, especially in well-reputed journals. And of course, because there's some information asymmetry, people rely on status signals. So where you got your PhD, who your advisor was, where you're now employed, all of these things are signals of competence. So the basic idea here is that if you've established yourself, then you're more likely to get away with projects that might be eccentric. And so if we take this equation metaphor more seriously, if your perceived competence is less than your perceived eccentricity, so you haven't really, you don't have any of these signals yet, and you launch into something that is quite outside the mainstream, the risk is that your work might not be taken too seriously. But there's also another risk, which is if you are, if you've already established yourself and you're a bit too shy about looking at some of these less known extreme contexts, the risk is that your work is too boring. It's playing it too safe. So maybe this is something that happens over time. And we can also think about balancing the eccentricity within each paper. So let's look at some of the evidence. And I'm just showing you this to make like it's not just a fancy metaphor, but there's fairly good evidence. And I just scanned a number of different papers in management and sociology and a number of fields. And what do we find? Aaron Reed has a study about consultants, and there with consultants, oftentimes there's so much business travel that you don't know when people are away from the office because they're on a business trip or because they're just at home relaxing. And she finds that consultants who establish an early reputation for hard work can take on extra ski vacations because if they're not in at the office Monday, people just assume that they're on business trips. There's another thing called the red sneakers effect. So business professors who get published in top tier journals actually dress more casually at the conferences we go to. And the idea here is that they already have the signal of high competence, so they don't need to show it with how they dress. Also important, when mainstream companies adopt controversial policies, they make those policies look more mainstream. So established scholars working on extreme settings might end up making those settings look more mainstream. And finally, successful theories, pop songs, and technological innovations tend to succeed. So they tend to catch on when they conform to a part of audience's expectations, but introduce an element of change. So from that, the last point is we can think of not how eccentric we are as individuals, but try to balance the eccentricity within our papers. So you can think of your paper having different elements. So how extreme is the context that you're researching? Second, how extreme or different is the theory or topic you're investigating within that setting? And finally, the eccentricity of your methods. Are you taking a method that's well established or one that's relatively new to audiences who may be less familiar with them? And again, the more established you are, the more you can get away with. So I'll give you examples of how you might do this. And I'm putting April on the spot a little bit with one of the papers, but this is because I think we'll see it later today. So in our paper, Maintaining Places of Social Inclusion, Ebola and Emergency Department, you can think of, there's a setting, which is an emergency department in Australia. There's a theory and a topic, which is place, institutional theory, emotions, custodianship, and finally a method, which is, maybe April disagrees, but I would say a combination of a realist ethnography in combination with grounded and inductive analysis. So some of these things are are more mainstream than others. So perhaps some of the inclusion of realist ethnography, institutional theory might allow for newer perspectives like place or custodianship to be accepted. We have a study by Geiger et al. And here we have a firefighting team in Hamburg. Theories, temporality, coordination, and routines, I would say, are fairly well established. But here the method is a bit more eccentric because they use a method that they themselves introduce, which is an event clock time graph. And so here there's a bit more of that. And finally, some of you may have read the paper by Derin et al., Sense Making from the Body and an Active Ethnography of Growing the Amazon. And here's probably the highest risk paper. The setting is a sculling of the Amazon, which is, again, not something I have read in a management paper before. It uses an embodied organizational sense making as its topic, and the method is an enacted ethnography. So those are things reviewers are probably less familiar with and might need more justification at that time. So this is the first part of just one idea of, when you are selecting, if you feel like your topic or setting is less mainstream, the eccentricity ratio might say you're a bit more conservative on other things like what research you contribute to or draw on, or the type of method that you use. So that's the first idea. And the second one draws a bit on, this is mainly some of the problems I have had conducting research in an extreme context. And just in very small side conversations I've had with people in previous workshops, this is a problem that some people have experienced and maybe you have also. So I was conducting a 3-year ethnography of storm chasing teams in the United States. And basically I was interested in how they dealt with what we call temporally uncertain work. So oftentimes extreme contexts, and I know Marcus has noticed too, are filled with very boring moments. We often focus on moments of great drama, but a lot of the time nothing is going on. So I was curious to see how these teams deal with these rapid shifts, unpredictable shifts between action and downtime. Just to give you some background, I spent time with those groups basically living with them. We spent the whole day driving around parts of the United States that are just usually flat and empty, looking for storms, forecasting them, chasing after them, and at the end of the day, checking into a hotel and going to sleep. Most of the time I was a passive observer. Over time within the groups, I started taking on more and more roles. So that was a window washer, the person who would find a restaurant in the town we go up to, a jogging partner and confidant, and again, later on, some meteorological activities. I took notes on an iPhone, so I figured that was something that I would always have on me, and it's less weird to see someone with a phone in their hand than a clipboard. So it perhaps, it's less obtrusive in that sense. And as soon as you type your notes, you can email them to yourself. So it's always possible to back them up. And the little gray box you see on the right side of the screen is what my notes looked before I ended up typing them up in full at the end of the day. So I left little time markers, my description of the setting, a small piece of dialogue that occurred there. So just to show some pictures, we had lots of delightful powdered eggs for breakfast. We did forecasts in various, either sometimes depending on the team, some scientific laboratories, and other times with enthusiasts and photographers at some room we took over in the hotel. A lot of the time you're just driving through places like rural Texas or Kansas or Oklahoma, where the most interesting thing is, as you see on the bottom left, a dead snake that we came across and which amused us because that was probably the only novel thing we experienced that day. And of course, there are moments of action as well. So here you can see sort of the clouds are slowly starting to build up in this hot environment. The team is looking at satellite imagery, which is what you see on the right side of the screen, and also at the bottom left, sort of observing the clouds to see how a storm is developing. For those of you who haven't heard me talk about storm chasers before, why do people do this? There's a bunch of reasons. Some of them are scientists who go out and try to collect data on things like how do tornadoes form. Many of them are photographers or enthusiasts who simply just want to see what a tornado looks like up close. And one of the teams was a commercial tour operator. So if you're interested, you can actually go and book a vacation in the US and have someone drive you around for a week, letting you see tornadoes up close. So that day we ended up chasing this storm here. It had quite large hail. It went through first some fields and then a small town in Texas. So this is the type of hail that we were collecting. I don't know if you can see, but it's quite large in my hand. The town was flooded afterwards, so we had to go back to our hotel after some near-miss car accidents. We made it to this place and recuperated for the evening. So this is a very sort of unusual setting, but I went in there with an ethics application, or partly ethics application and partly also guided by my ethics training of what human participant research looks like. And obviously I try to uphold this during my research. And this is still from my PhD, the Canadian Tri-Council ethics statement. And I'm sure, wherever we have participants from everywhere, but in your country, there's probably something that looks like this. And here the idea was respect for human dignity has been an underlying value, and respect for human dignity requires the research involving humans conducted in a manner that is sensitive to the inherent worth of all human beings and the respect and consideration that they are due. So all human beings, we respect them as part of our research. Sounds pretty simple. So what happens if you find yourself in such a scenario? So now imagine that you have been with these storm chasers. They know that you're an ethnographer, you're doing some field work, and you check into the hotel with them. So here's the scenario. It's early June, and there's been some rotation on the team. Some of the members depart while others arrive, which is very normal in these types of organizations. One guy, Chris, he's the most experienced forecaster, and you, the ethnographer, are among those people who are staying on in this group. And within a day after this rotation, after the new members come in, Chris asks you, can you tell the dynamics of the team have changed? One of the new members, Lucas, is more assertive during forecast discussions than the prior members, who usually defer to Chris's expertise. Lucas takes pride in his forecasting ability. Chris doubts his competence. More than that, Chris feels Lucas is intent on pursuing the storms he himself had forecast. He thinks this guy is chasing after what he calls junk targets, rather than what Chris considers the most plausible targets. So Chris confides to you because you've been working with him for some time, observing, and some level of trust and friendship has developed. And Chris tells you that he's been acquiescing to Lucas. He's been letting Lucas guide the team more because he wants to be a democratic person. Just because he considers himself the best forecaster doesn't mean he gets to tell everyone what to do. Chris also wants to avoid upsetting Lucas. He says, I wouldn't have a problem telling another member that a target is junk, but Lucas is sensitive. So Chris comes to you and he has a plan, what he calls to soften Lucas up a bit. And he wants your advice as someone who understands management, because he does know you are a management researcher, on how to proceed. And he tells you this. He tells you that next time they get into an argument about whose forecast is correct, he's going to wait until Lucas is most confident in the forecast that Chris thinks is the least reliable. He's going to have Lucas let his way, and he's going to let Lucas lead the team where they're going to have an absolute disaster, that they're going to get to a part where they expected a tornado and they're going to see blue skies. Lucas is going to be humiliated, and after that, he might not be so assertive and he might be more cooperative during these discussions. So he says, you're kind of the management expert, you know how these things work. What shall I do? Do you think the plan would work? So do you think it would work? Or what do you say to Chris in this situation? If someone wants to write in chat maybe, or if you want to just sort of speak up, I'd be curious to see what advice might you give to Chris in this situation? this falls outside the scope of my role. Yes, I've actually, in a few cases where other people have described similar things, I've heard similar responses where people say, we're just here to observe and you know best what to do. Matthias says, depends on the fact if you're an action researcher. True. So what are your assumptions behind the type of research you're doing and what is a legitimate method? You are the expert. I am here to learn. Okay. My answer was kind of something like that. So I wheedled out of it by saying that, you're kind of, what's best here and you understand the situation as you've been part of this team the longest. And so I kind of deferred it to him. And I felt that, if I had given him specific advice, now that really sort of, at least I wasn't doing action research. So that was shaping the situation and the struggle for leadership more than observing it. But then I also needed to sort of say it in a soft way, because if I had immediately stepped back as I'm just a researcher and you go off and just act naturally, it would be very hard to go back and become this friendly person again, because, now I've made a very strict separation and I've clarified that I'm not this guy's buddy. So maybe different people have different views here, but I took a step that, established myself as a certain type of ethnographer. So by answering, you were getting, James writes, by answering, you were getting to understand more about Chris if you ID yourself prior to researchers as an active participant. Yeah, I think that's true. And I think maybe this is kind of not just yourself, but maybe you're enacting a situation that, you're learning more by doing something rather than simply observing, which is, I think, another great assumption about, what is ethnography about. So the way that sort of helps me through these, and I think all of those ideas are good, which is the idea of a defining moment. And Joseph Badaracco came up with this idea, and he's a professor of business ethics at Harvard Business School. And he suggested that a lot of times at workplaces, the ethics statements are very nice that, be respectful to people. And, everyone would agree that we want to be respectful, but in real life, we're often challenged because our values are in conflict with each other. So we want to be supportive, but we want to be objective. We want to be someone who builds rapport, but we also want to maintain neutrality. So the trouble is not following the ethics guides, but dealing with when their values conflict with each other. Marcus says, I think I would help him reflect on the situation and let him make the choice himself. So again, yeah, I think that's like another way to deal with this situation, which is not telling him what to do, but maybe perhaps structuring the situation. And maybe that goes further in solidifying your report rather than just sort of stepping back. So what Joseph Badaracco says, that the choices we make during defining moments form, test, and reveal ourselves. Our personal and professional identities arise from the accumulation of irreversible commitments we make in a defining moment across our careers. And just to sort of, adapt that to the ethnography context, ethnographies I have felt are often very unstructured roles that, people might accept us, but they have a very vague sense of who we are and what we're doing. And they might not even understand it by the time we're done with the study. So, you can go in there and if you provide actionable advice, whether it's in the form of being an action researcher or responding to Chris, as James said, or like Marcus, and James here again notes, helping them reflect on the question, you become a certain type of ethnographer. You become the ethnographer who is probably maximizing the value of building rapport, but also now you are more involved in the setting. And so it's kind of a fork in the road, I like to think about it. There's no right answer, but maybe over time through these small decisions based on how you respond to things like Chris, you become either a more involved ethnographer or a less one. So the key idea is maybe not that there's a right answer, but to pick a set of responses throughout your ethnography that consistently leads you towards a type of ethnographer you want to be. Do you want to be distant, objective one? Do you want to be a friendly one? Do you want to be one that helps shape the setting? What's most important to you? And so whenever you come across these sort of these dilemmas, Badaracco suggests first we should be very attentive to what feelings and intuitions are coming into conflict. So if we feel awkward about something, it's probably because we want to do something, but we also don't want to do it. And there's good reasons for both of those things. We want to maintain our trust and friendliness, but also we don't want to shape the setting too much. So that after you've identified that, he suggests that we should think that should give us pause to reflect on what values are most important to you. So if you think about yourself as an extreme context researcher, what is most important to you and what are you willing to slip? So if building trust and learning the most you can about the setting is more important to you than staying totally objective and neutral and passive as an observer, then maybe you're likely to give Chris stronger advice. But if neutrality and non-involvement is more important to you, then perhaps you take a less structured approach. Virginia says, don't we affect the outcome just by being there? I agree completely. And so maybe a good way to think about this is by degrees. And I think some people like Anne Langley and Thomas Rouleau and a few others in sort of methodological pieces have argued there's never fully non-involved ethnography, and all research always involves some level of deception, and it's really a matter of which end of the continuum are. So I agree completely. And Matthias adds, be aware of the bias in that case. So yes, so we can also account for that as well as we can in perhaps the writing up stage. And finally, the third part is once we have identified a conflict and what our priority is, we don't always have to take the obvious solutions out there, but we can come up with a third one. And I think Marcus and James have kind of sort of noticed this, is that you don't have to answer Chris's question to you directly, but you can look for a third approach. And they suggested, you help, him think through the options. That way you are not totally directly influencing the outcome, but neither are you distancing yourself from Chris. So I think, there's always usually some level of imagination or creativity that will help you get that thing you want without sacrificing too much on the other side of the conflict. So that was, I think, the most clear-cut case. And I'll just run you through two others. Maybe you've come across similar situations. Second one is about informed consent. So, we want to sort of tell people how we're using the data, what we're using it for, and of course, protecting the data, right? So, if you're interviewing people, you don't give personal information from one interviewee to the other. I noticed that when I was working with these teams, I worked with three different teams closely, a professional tour operator, a scientific college-affiliated group, and a group of enthusiasts. What is very different is very few of us in life go making friends according to theoretical sampling. We usually find our clique and we make friends that are similar to them. If you're a researcher, you are very unique in the field, it seems, because you purposefully sample different organizations. And so you might be the only one who knows certain people once you enter a setting. So you might be working at two different competing organizations, and you're going to be what Ron Bird calls a broker in a structural network. So if you look on the image on the right, that's my amateur attempt to draw a social network diagram. You can see, there was this college-affiliated team where everybody knew everyone else, and they knew none of the people on the private team. And the people on private team, who are these group of enthusiasts and photographers, all knew each other, but none of them knew anyone from the college team. So as soon as they found out that I was doing research across multiple groups, they found out that I was a broker, that I was someone who had access to other groups. And the first thing that came was curiosity. So someone from the team of enthusiasts said, what was it like to chase with the other team? And quite naturally, when I was with the other team, they started asking, well, what is it like to work outside? So basically, here's like another sample, right? You want to protect people's privacy, but there's also some reciprocity. You have been spending your whole time investigating people and asking them questions. And now when you ask them a question, you feel maybe that when they ask you a question, you perhaps feel obligated to share something. So again, this is another dilemma. How much do you share? Do you share anything at all? Do you share general information that can't be pinned to any personal data? Or do you simply say, look, I'm a researcher and I'm not allowed to do this? So again, I don't know if there's a right answer, but perhaps this is something you also come across. So finally, last point is managing your identity. And all of us have sort of different experiences depending on what type of extreme context we research. So when you're studying a professional group, let's say doctors or container ship sailors, it's very unlikely that you'll be confused for one of them. Not so with storm chasers. You know, it's not a guarded profession, let's say like medicine is. And so, you know, I started off with a very sort of, you know, formal, I'm a researcher, blah, blah, blah. But once I'm in the setting, I'm very easily confused with the members of the people that I'm studying. So when I went to a gas station, the cashier asked, so cool, are you a storm chaser? What do I say to that? More dangerously, another customer there asks, we're headed for the west. Could it be dangerous? And now I'm being pulled to give meteorological advice, which is better put for the other team members. I got interviewed on the news, again, because they were looking for a representative of that group. And so I was constantly being pulled out of my role as a researcher in order to, because people were looking for the participant. So again, how much do you allow yourself to relax from that role, and how do you deal with those questions? So those are sort of three problems I've come across. Yeah, so the second idea is when you're conducting the field work and maybe in these unstructured situations, you find out that the standard ethics templates sound good, but they lead to dilemmas when you're doing research. And so thinking about these ideas through the Butteraco framework has been quite useful. So there are some resources here that I found also useful. So in prior workshops, people like Anne Langley, Mark Derin, Stefan Farley have talked about, you know, is something a good research opportunity, or is it an act of voyeurism? Can research in disaster sites help people in the long run, or are we just getting in their way? So those are some of the questions I've had. So hopefully that was useful.